homeworks? Does anybody have anything 47 through 62? Yeah, take a minute, find your stuff. We got time. This is trigonometry. That's what you're looking. That's the word you're searching for. What's up?
Can we do 49?
49? Yeah, sure.
I'm 4.
I'd like you to calculate it.
You won't need a calculator today.
Oh, thank God. Thank the Lord.
All right.
I got just about the same.
Okay, wait.
So, if you look at the two sides, one doesn't appear much more complicated than the other, right? You agree? All right. So, which one do you want to go with? You want to go left. Sounds good. Now, when I look at secant squared y minus 1, that speaks identity to me. What is that equal to? Yeah, I think it's a P3. It's cosecant, isn't it? Or I'm sorry, cotangent, isn't it? Tangent? Okay, thank you. Everybody feel okay there? What? Tan squared plus 1 is equal to secant, right? So if I subtract 1 from both sides, tangent squared is equal to secant squared minus 1. Oh, that's a y. All right. So I notice now, okay, well, tangent squared can have a sign in it, right? If I write it as sine squared over cosine squared using Q1. So I have like one of those. Look okay. So I'll do a little reducee. And I'm excited there because if I look, what am I supposed to have in my numerator on the right-hand side? Sine. So I'm there. The numerator's locked. I'm not going to touch that. If I look, the denominator I have is cosine squared. And I want that to be 1 minus sine squared. Well, hey, that's P1, right? And so I'll be finished there. Nick, does that feel? It's all right? So the trickiest part was probably recognizing to do that, right? Rewrite tangent squared as sine squared over cosine squared and then reduce without having to like monkey around too hard with that. Who's next? Tommy.
Can you do our 53, please?
53. Sure thing, my dude. All right. Which side did you want to work with here, Tommy? Okay. So when I look at the left side, I see cosine to the fourth minus sine to the fourth. When I see that minus sign in the middle, I'm going to think it's, and the exponent's even. That looks like a difference of 2 squares to me. That's my projector making that god-awful sound. Okay? So remember, the difference of 2 squared is like a squared minus b squared. So cosine to the fourth is like cosine squared squared. And sine to the fourth is like sine squared squared, right? So my a is like cosine squared, and my b is like sine squared. So I'm just going to factor and write this as cosine squared plus sine squared times cosine squared minus sine squared. And if I look to where I want to end up, I got that right there.
So basically, it's not even an identity, it's just...
I just factored.
Yeah.
But I still have this thing. I got to get rid of that somehow. Yeah, that's just P1, right? Sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. And 1 times anything just doesn't do anything, right? It's an identity. So I'm left with the right-hand side. So it's a factor and 1 identity, boom, gone. Starting with the right-hand side would have been tough because you realize that it's like, okay, well, I have to do this times 1, and then I have to replace 1 with cosine squared plus sine squared, and that's a tough pull to make if you had tried to go the other way. But you could have gone the other direction without having to factor, but that's, I think it would be a tough, like a tough observation to make. Anthony.
Can you do 60?
60, sure thing. Okay. All right, Anthony, which side did you want to work on? You want to work on the right. So if I look at this thing, what does that kind of look like to you?
It looks like a...
Kind of looks like a quadratic, right? So to go this way, what do you think I'm going to have to do? Factor. So if I go this way, what do you think I'm going to have to do instead? Foil. Which one would we rather do? We'd rather foil. So I'm going to work on the left-hand side first, I think. Not that you can't do the right-hand side. It's not a difficult factoring to do, but I would just, if I have my choice, like I'm going to pass. So here's the trick. I see that I have a sine x already that I need to have on the outside. So I'm going to write that as sine to the fourth times sine x. And now that piece is locked. I'm not touching that. That part of my answer is done. Cool. Now, if I look for an identity, sine to the fourth doesn't get me much. But if I just rewrite that again, instead as sine squared times sine squared, that's the same thing as sine to the fourth, right? And that's a real helpful for me because I know I can rewrite sine squareds in terms of cosines using P1. So I'm going to replace those sine squareds with 1 minus cosine squareds. And then I just need to FOIL that piece out and I should be good to go. So 1 minus cosine squared minus cosine squared plus cosine to the fourth. And when I combine the negative cosine squareds, I have negative 2 cosine squareds. And now I'm all dunzos. Anthony, feel okay? Again, you could have factored and gone the other way. You would have factored to get this, and then you use P1 to go up to that. But again, if I have the choice between factoring and foiling, let me go the FOIL route. Usually going to be easier than having to, and having to factor. Not that factoring was impossible here. Wouldn't have been that difficult, but it's an unfamiliar context, right? We did a little bit of practice with it on that first sheet, factoring the quadratics, or factoring the trig things like a quadratic, but probably doesn't feel very familiar. What do you guys think? A couple more if you want. Who else? Anybody else? God bless you. You're welcome. Okay. Quiz time. All right, I have a little bit of good news for you in regarding the quiz.
Order quiz.